So this is a project that we operate here in the west of Ireland, a public health programme, an interagency project led by the task force, the Western Region Drug and Alcohol Task Force, based on the Icelandic prevention model. And it's designed, can we use their prevention approach that was developed there to improve health outcomes for our young people here in Ireland, in the west of Ireland, particularly at the moment. So much of what I'll talk about is available on the website, which you'll see there, west.planetyouth.ie. And these slides will be available on the recording that we'll put up, so you don't need to be scribbling down too hard, I hope. Backed by the big statutory organisations here in the west of Ireland, everybody's interested in improving outcomes for young people, and everybody's interested in kind of this prevention approach. This is why we do it. It's a slide from Iceland where they dramatically improved adolescent substance use rates from amongst the highest in the world when they started to what are currently about the lowest in the world. So very impressive changes up there, but lots of other things change, which is why we're also kind of using this prevention approach to look at some other things here. So we can see we have some concerns around alcohol and some other substance use in our young population, and then we see things like screen problems, poor mental health, lack of sleep, which is a good part of the reason why we're here tonight. So what's been happening since we started back in 2018 is every 2 years, all of our young people here in the west of Ireland, and we've 90 schools, around 5,000 or 6,000 of them participate every 2 years on the return to school having sat the junior certificate. So they're 15 or 16 typically. They sit down and they fill in this questionnaire, very detailed, which asks them all about their life in the round. So it's nearly 45 minutes to fill it in. It asks about life at home, life online, life in school, their hobbies, their friendships, their sports, substance use, a lot of stuff related to kind of mental health and life experiences and things like that. So it is quite detailed, and it allows us to get an exceptional insight into how the young people are getting on. Now, initially it was done in a paper-based version. It's done online now, but the undertaking is really to try and get the preventative information we can bring to bear and bring to influence into these four big areas of our young people's lives. So their life at home, their life in the peer group, their life in school, what are they doing in their spare time, which is a big part of the Icelandic prevention model, keeping young people busy, running around and occupied. Now, these are the kids who sit the survey, but it's not particularly about them. It's more, how do we use this information that we're getting to improve the situation for the kids coming behind. So you see here our 12, 13-year-olds starting into secondary, our junior infant kids. In fact, there's a preschool component to this now as well. So we do very detailed now, 56-page reports at a municipal level. So at city level, at county level, or even down to kind of town level, school reporting. We can see local data, local trends. You'll see here Galway City. That's kind of the Reek. We have Kylemore, the city, there's Salthill and so on, Lough. And we can then begin to see what's trending, what's going well, what's going poorly. I'm not going to dwell on, I'm going to skip through all this very quickly, but you can see here, an improvement in our cannabis use rates. We can see this improving, things going maybe not so good around alcohol, problems with sleep, we'll see, problems with time online and social media, mental health, bit of a worry, that kind of thing, right? We do very good information for schools and support for schools. So there's a nice school transition website here that's useful for that move from 6th class into first year. It's a very stressful time in our young people's lives. And then that's a bit of that. And then there's a nice kind of teaching website called The Facts, which is useful for SPHE, and it covers a whole variety of topics that you can use in the classroom. So they can see their substance use, mental health, cyberbullying, sleep. So it's returning data from this survey for use in junior cycle SPHE, right? Now, there's a nice kind of additional teaching, 3-lesson teaching module that was developed as part of this project, and it's on that same website, called The Importance of Sleep. And there's 3 lessons, so about sleep, my relationship with sleep, how can I improve my sleep? So it's a nice kind of a teaching module. Lucy was helpful in developing this, going back a couple of years. So that gets a lot of use in our schools around the country now. And it's up there on the website, and it's something just you mightn't have been aware of, so I'm mentioning it there. We do extreme effort of trying to get good information out to parents here in the west of Ireland. So around 6,500 of these little booklets go out to our junior infant parents incoming and our first year parents incoming every September, October, November. And there's the new little preschool booklet that you see there bottom right. That's what the office looks like very much throughout kind of the autumn term. But a good chunk of the work there, and particularly around the national school, is done as a TY project. So we get a lot of young people in to help with the distribution. This is what the first year parent booklet looks like, and we get out to a lot of the first year parent nights at our schools here in the west of Ireland, and we try and give parents some preventative information as part of their first year induction evening. So they get a little copy of the booklet. That's a sticker they can put on the fridge, which is guidance around bedtime. Talks a little bit about the overall project, the importance of communication. That's that page. Hobbies and sports, keeping them going and that kind of thing, very important. A little bit around substance use there and vaping, concerns around that, obviously. And then stuff around these nicotine pouches. A lot of concern about that as well. Alcohol is the big one. We're trying to just encourage parents to work together and not give them alcohol when they come asking, because they will, and sooner than you think, kind of thing. So it's just trying to get ahead of that and giving parents good information to club together and help on that stuff. Yeah, screen use is getting worse. Social media time's been getting worse, and sleep was identified as a very significant problem in the second survey that was done in 2020. So we started trying to investigate that a bit more and do a bit more at that. And Lucy's kind of been helping with this sort of thing ever since then, really. So this is kind of where we're at, and I'll show you here in a bit more detail, right? This is based on 5,000 of the kids who sat the survey in our 90 schools and centres in Galway, Mayo, Roscommon. And you'll see there, 45% of them are getting what's considered the right amount of sleep, which is 8 hours or more, right? They'd want to be getting 8 or 9 hours. That's sort of the kind of good guidance there. 32% get 7 hours a night. We kind of consider that those guys will catch up. They'll manage at that. They're not doing as well as the rest, but they'll kind of muddle through kind of thing, but they're definitely not doing as well as the rest. Now, the 23%, you'll see there, the 15 and the 8 are really struggling because they're way down here at this kind of sleep deficit kind of territory, which is your 6 hours or less a night. And the 8% then are really going to be in bother. Now, this was a question that went in 2022 because we didn't know, do you have a phone in your bedroom at night? And you'll see there that 80% said they did. Right. Well, it actually was 83. It's come down a small little bit in the latest survey. It was 83 in 2022 survey, 24 surveys at 80. So it's improved marginally, but it's still a lot of room for improvement there. So if you correlate this kind of question against the sleep question, it makes for an interesting kind of point of view, right? So do you have a phone in your bedroom at night? Now, 20% of the kids said, no, I don't, which is 1,000. That's 1,000 of the 5,000 said, no, I don't. And you'll see there, 64% of them are getting 8 hours sleep a night. So it makes a massive difference, this not having a phone in your bedroom now. And you'll see there, the 4,000 that do have a phone in their room at night, only 40% are getting that magical 8 hours of sleep plus a night. And you'll see over there at the far right of the scale, 12% of kids without a phone in the room are in the sleep deprived kind of category, and it's 26% then if you do have a phone. So I hope that makes sense. Now, this is why it's so important. The sleep actually has a dramatic impact in every single area of a teenager's life. So it doesn't matter what you care to go and look at. You could look at self-esteem or resilience scores or all the validated scales. Here I'm just showing you three things. So there's physical health. This is what's in the little booklet that goes out. So the relationship between 8 hours sleep and having good or very good physical health is very dramatic and linear, you'll see. Same thing for mental health. And down at the end on the right there, you'll see what's called school engagement scores. And those are kind of readiness for school, not so much academics. It's 10 questions and there's a scale, you make a scale and it's related to readiness for school, getting on with teachers, enjoyment of school, for want of a better way. But one of the 10 questions is about academics, but that's all. So the amount of sleep that the kids getting is critically important to all these different aspects of their life. So it's a huge, huge issue. Not terribly well covered in the curriculum or even in the national discourse, really. So now I'm nearly there. So I've been rabbiting on a bit, but I wanted to kind of alert you to this. And this is sort of why we put this evening on, really. This was a question that went in. It wasn't in the previous surveys, but in the 2024 survey questionnaire, this went in early on. And it was a question just to try and get a sense of how we're doing for numbers for some of these kind of more neurodivergent teens. So there was that one there. You can see, have you ever been diagnosed with any of the following? So dyslexia, dyscalculia, dyspraxia, yes or no, right? And then ADD, ADHD, yes or no. Autism or ASD, yes or no. Or I'm waiting for an assessment. So the kids could take one or none, or they could take more than one. So it wasn't that they had to just select one. They could maybe pick two. And this is kind of the way that was broken down here, right? So this is based again on this sort of sample of about 5,000 kids at 15 and 16. So 13% said that they had been diagnosed with one of those three: dyslexia, dyscalculia, dyspraxia. Then we had our ADD, ADHD 6%, autism, ASD 4%. It was just a little bit less. It's rounded up to 4. And then I'm waiting for an assessment there. You'll see 440, which is 10% of kids in the kind of valid sample said that they were waiting for this assessment, right? So now that's a lot of kids. If you add all of those numbers up, that brings you to 33%, a third, right? But because they could tick more than one, it's not a third of kids, we would say, that have some kind of neurodiverse diagnosis or condition. It's less than that because they could tick more than one. But if you kind of do the maths on it, it was roughly 1 in 4 kids ticked something of those kind of 4 options, right? So that's a lot of our kids, right? Now, I'm very nearly there. I just wanted to show you this, and I suppose this is kind of a correlation or cross-tabulation in the data between sleep and these neurodiverse kind of answers, right? So I'm not going to go too deeply into this. I think in this instance, the one to really look at here is the 8 hours or more on the left, right? So if you're saying, no, I don't have any of these issues, I'm not waiting for a diagnosis for anything, which is around nearly 4,000 of them, 48% of that gang are getting the right amount of sleep. And if you're dyslexic, it drops down to 41. You can see autism down to 36. And then these next two, I'm waiting for an assessment for something, you're down to only 32% are getting the right amount of sleep, and similar number then for the ADHD kids, right? So now the other thing I was just going to show you, and this is the kind of the last slide, if you like, is the same kind of categories and answers, if you like. But here, what's lifted out is this is our sleep deficit kind of gang who are getting 6 hours or less sleep a night. So the same kind of thing here. So if you're not waiting for an assessment, which is, the majority of them, 21% of kids are sleep deprived, this kind of very poor level of sleep. And then it goes up and up. So you got 28% there for your autism and dyslexia. It goes up to, 36% for the ADD, ADHD kids. And then if you're waiting for an assessment, worse again, you're up around this 39% of kids not getting this kind of sufficient sleep or anything like it. So that's it, really. I'm going to hand you over. I hope you found something that interesting. It'll be in the slides, and we're going to maybe touch back at the end of this a little bit around kind of supports here available in the West of Ireland. And there again, once again, is the west.planetyouth.ie website. So I'm going to shut up with that. I'll hand you over to Lucy, and we hope you find this evening informative and supportive. So thanks very much.
Thank you, Emmett. And it's lovely to be here. So by way of introduction, my name is Lucy Wolfe. I am a sleep practitioner and relationship mentor, and I am a postgraduate researcher on my way to a PhD at some point. The purpose of tonight and the objective of tonight really is to help you and support you and ultimately empower you to think about your children's sleep in different ways, and potentially take the performance anxiety out of the act of going to sleep, and also just to share with you some various perspectives around what we can be doing, and that ultimately it's not really about what happens once the lights go out. If I'm honest with you, it's going to really be all about what happens throughout all the other hours before we ever get to bedtime. Obviously, Emmett has shared his statistics, and what we really know is that, up to 80% of children with neurodiversity have some forms of sleep challenges. There are understandings that possibly there are changes and differences in their sleep architecture and their processing, the way that they process sleep. And what we see very commonly is a difficulty to get to sleep, very long sleep latency, difficulty maintaining sleep, and we often see as well short sleep durations as well. So that the understanding is that maybe that neurodivergent individuals don't need as much sleep. They find it more difficult to get to sleep, and often the reports are about finding it difficult to switch off. And of course, in the adolescent years, we see a lot of sleep challenges anyway. So tonight I want to try and introduce you to like a holistic sleep lens, where we take as many of the aspects that influence sleep as possible and slowly make adjustments and changes. And I mean that slowly, And I also would expect you and hope that you would be able to modify the guidance this evening to fit your own family system and the capacity and the capability of your own child too, and funnel things until they feel like they're making an impact, and to go slowly with the changes. So I suppose sleep, we'll look at the different aspects first. So the sleep biology, driven by the homeostatic drive and your child's circadian system, and that is adjusting in adolescence anyway. And it is governed largely by internal cues and processes and external cues and stimuli. And most commonly, we talk about light and dark being powerful influences to the circadian rhythm. So we'll put that to one side for a second. We are going to talk tonight a lot about the nervous system and gain nervous system awareness, because sleep requires a downshift in regulation for sleep to actually happen. And a lot of the time we are looking at overactive or overactivated nervous systems that have gone into fight, flight, freeze and fawn responses for a number of different reasons. And then, of course, we know that with the neurodivergent individual, we often see a hyper and hypo reactivity anyways, so a heightened experience to how they experience their world. And so as a result of that, we are probably seeing that downdraft into how they experience their sleep. Also, we look at, underlying needs, attachment, autonomy in equal measure, emotional expressions, psychological or emotional safety, their sensory safety, their need of validation, reassurance, and I guess quieting overstimulation and beginning to understand things before we look at changing things. Well, I'm going to focus tonight as well about diet and nutrition, because we see big links between the gut health and sleep. And that comes down to the types of food, the timing of food, the quality, hydration, gut health, and deficiencies. So we're going to talk a little bit about that. And we're going to briefly talk about the family dynamics and the environment that we're creating, the values, the beliefs within the family home, the relating and communication styles, what we're modeling, the bedroom and the digital technologies. And I suppose, look, we're all doing our best as parents, and I know you will be doing more than your best, and you probably feel exhausted from all of the load, the emotional labor, the physical labor of just parenting at this time. So if I'm looking at an integrative, holistic thinking to help improve sleep, I'm going to take it again using those levers, and I'm going to look at foundation and kind of energy. We're relying on rhythm, flow, consistency, reliability. And I'm going to just get you to reflect momentarily, firstly, about what example we set as the adults in the household. And of course, what that looks like in terms of what we're hoping our young people to do. And also, what energy are we creating? And then move into our guidance, our support, and have a multiple perspectival dynamic of guidance, direction, holding space, maintaining boundaries, and integrating teaching and role modeling. And similarly, that the support that we give is direct, it's calm, it's confident, but more importantly, that with our young people, it is collaborative, so that we are gathering them into us and helping them be part of the solution. And just to remind you that force is the enemy of engagement. So we are going to always choose connection over correction. And we're going to try our best to bring to the surface that most sleep challenges are resolved by addressing aspects that are just interfering with the body's natural rhythm, the homeostasis and the lifestyle and the whole family support of sleep. So with that in mind, we obviously rule out considerations, and we'll always have medical concerns and symptoms that go outside the scope of this evening's presentation. But just to be mindful that if there is snoring, restless, snoring and sleep apnea issues, restless leg syndrome, depressive symptoms and mood, and underlying conditions like pain, we often need those aspects to be taken care of. but I'll move on and then start to target focus, things that are within our remit. So firstly, I'm going to just get you to think about when was the last time we had bloods done, and to look at, do we have deficiencies, which are very common in this population? So low iron levels or ferritin levels, magnesium deficiency, vitamin D deficiency, and DHA, like omega fatty acid deficiency. They are known contributors to short sleep duration, disrupted sleep, and low sleep quality. So it's definitely important to maybe get that picture, as well as beginning to make other changes that we might talk about this evening. So just going to go back to the sleep biology for a moment and just mention that we're looking at the homeostasis, and that really is just about sleep pressure and the cues that are stimulated internally and externally. We're looking at sleep needs. Emmett's already mentioned that in a general population, the sleep need translates to somewhere between 8 to 10 hours. And of course, there's going to be variability, and some people will need more and some will need less. And I guess ultimately, it might be worth dialing back from, working on an amount of sleep and just maybe working on sleep getting easier, less difficult within the family system, more collaborative. And then maybe over time, bedtime times can be adjusted earlier once going asleep and staying asleep is better managed with and for your young person. Sleep itself loves regularity. It loves regularity in all areas, in the waking area, in the eating area, in the drinking and the resting area, because we're looking at rhythmicity and we're looking at consistency. And I guess I would begin to try and bring that into our practices as best as possible. And sometimes that does mean a consistent wake time. And the general guidance is that we try not to have more than an hour deviation on weekends. Now, that can be really difficult to observe if you have a young person who isn't getting to sleep until 2 or 3 a.m., difficulty getting up for school in the morning, and the dilemma about whether we let them sleep on over the weekend. And if you don't, that we're creating an even bigger sleep deficit. So we have to be very careful here about how quickly or not we make that adjustment. But ultimately, the sleep in on the weekend serves as a dysregulatory function. So it makes intellectual sense to let them sleep in and let them sleep it off. But if it then continues to have problems to go to sleep at bedtime throughout all the other days, then a regular wake time with not more than the hour adrift is typically recommended. And then without laboring too much about bedtime and what time it should be, often it is arrived at by doing a backward math. So if your child needs to get up for school at 6 o'clock or 7 o'clock in the morning, and we take a mean average of 9 hours, or even if you take 8 and we go backwards, then the backward math of 11 or whatever is going to be the time that we would assume their bedtime needs to be. But again, I'm probably going to say not to worry too much about that at this moment in time, because it might be one of the later things that you introduce as you make adjustments and changes. For teens in general, they are in a delayed sleep phase hormonally. It is stimulated by the onset of puberty, and often the general bedtimes that your children had when they were much younger naturally drift. And we see lots of young children, young adult, on the way to being young adults, not really able to go to sleep much before 11 p.m. Now, some of you will sit here tonight and say, oh my God, 11 p.m. would be amazing, because your children are maybe not achieving sleep until 2 or 3 a.m. But I suppose I just want you to know that it's very normal to experience that drift. And then, of course, it can go into a little bit of free fall. And then the regularity, the regular wake time sort of helps to underpin the bedtime. We need about 16 hours of awake time in order to get to sleep in the first place. But it's not in isolation. And I suppose I've mentioned already that sleep requires a shift of the parasympathetic state. And I guess chronic sympathetic activation, it blocks sleep onset and continuity. And the activation triggers are going to be stress factors. That could be stress from being overtired, stress from having, emotional stress, a relational mismatch, their attachment style, our parenting approach, and how things are received by them. And then, of course, we have the activation triggers that are to do with your diet, pro-inflammatory foods, sugar, caffeine sensitivities, and of course, circadian disruption, which is this misaligned wake and bedtimes, often alongside dysregulating eating patterns as well. So I suppose the first thing we might look at is nervous system regulation tools. And they have a wide range from breath work, vagus nerve activation, somatic grounding exercises, expressive outlets, journaling, grounded meditations, and body scans. And often when we talk about bedtime, we often talk about these exercises for bedtime exclusively. But the research tends to indicate that what we're trying to do is help the body come out of that fight-flight response throughout the course of the day. So if we're going to start integrating some regulatory tools, we'll start integrating them from the beginning of the day. And let's say, for example, if we look at breathing, and I'm going to introduce you to the 4-4-6-4 breathing technique, then we'd maybe introduce those techniques 3 times in a day, in the morning when we wake up, maybe after lunch and after dinner. So again, just for example, what does this technique do? It helps shift the nervous system from the stressed fight or flight response state to the rest and digest. But it isn't effective enough or solo just in the evening time. We're looking to create that regulation throughout the course of the day. It can help to reduce anxiety, improve concentration, and promote a sense of calm. And it's probably one of the easiest regulation tools you can invoke, where we breathe in through the nose for 4, we hold it for 4, we exhale for 6, and then we hold our empty lungs for 4 more. And again, beginning to kind of get into that practice, I think is one of the best things we could start to do, or teach our children to do, encourage them to do. And then in line with that, helping them to become in tune with their bodies, like how do they start to feel when they've done these exercises, after what they've eaten. And again, we're trying to maybe generate a sense of literacy about their mind-body connection. So the breathing, the 4-4-6 breathing, is one regulatory exercise you could begin to introduce. Or you could introduce a body scan where we go from our eyes closed, top of the head, and mentally scan down the body. Again, you will modify to your own child's capacity. So yesterday I was working with a child who is nonverbal. So we'll do our best to model the breathing and help him to begin to take that on board. And likewise, you would begin to do similarly. Another one is the 5-4-3-2-1 grounding technique, where we are trying to bring them down 5 things that you can see around you, 4 things that you can touch and feel, 3 things that you can hear, 2 things that you can smell, and 1 thing that you can taste. And again, this method pulls focus away from anxious thoughts back to the immediate environment, helps to calm the nervous system. So that's where the emphasis is. And we're thinking that the nervous system being brought out of fight, flight, freeze, fawn activation regularly throughout the course of the day, even if it doesn't feel like it's in the stress response, will begin to have that regulatory impact, so that we're leading into bedtime. Matt Walker, the neuroscientist, says that sleep is like landing a plane, and you can think why that might feel accurate, because we're not just talking about the evening time at this moment in time, we're talking about what's happening during the day. Obviously, as caregivers, we also provide co-regulation, and that co-regulation can come in a load of different forms. Your voice slowed, its pace, its tone, you having longer exhales, having gentle pressure or touch, and attunement. And there's your relationship beginning to be part of this. We look at open communication, we look at empathetic listening and engagement, and creating a safety of expression, and then also back to that modeling. So what we're hoping for, that we sort of practice that as well. So if we were going to begin to try and integrate this into the start of the day and looking at that regular wake time, some of this is not easy, and I'm really aware of that. But first, you would look at a regular wake time. I think sometimes it might be worth looking at like a wake me up light, so that the light gradually comes on in the room, and that can help to stimulate the waking part of the brain. And it isn't an abrupt end to nighttime sleep. And that abrupt end can often mean that the body starts the day in the fight flight response. So just a gradual awakening, and then maybe even beginning the day with morning light, which I know you'll be super familiar with hearing that guidance. There's a lot of evidence to support its efficacy. So morning light and movement is what I always include there too, within the first half an hour or hour of getting up. And I would integrate the nervous system regulation too, like the breathing exercise, and start to integrate that into the fabric of our lives. Additionally, we're trying to anchor the day from every perspective, from waking up, exposure to the light influence. And I would predict that we wouldn't skip breakfast. We're looking ideally for a protein-rich breakfast. And I know that we're going to talk about food in a minute. And I obviously know that there'll be limitations, there'll be restrictions, there will be narrow frameworks for eating for certain types of food. But again, within the best that you can do, we would try not to skip the breakfast, regulate the hormones, the blood sugar levels, and of course look at hydration, because hydration is really important to sleep as well. And it's important that when we look at hydration, that we're not looking at like chugging a load of fluid at just one time. We're better off having small increments of fluids throughout the course of the day. And as we go through the day, it's probably important that we look at incorporating some daytime stress releases as well. So, we maybe create opportunity every 1.5 hours throughout the course of the day to have, aspects such as movement bursts, an opportunity to do some journaling or something creative like art, drawing, having social connection, and of course back to sunlight as well. And that, again, what we're doing now, we're creating what we talked about earlier, which was the rhythmicity and flow. And these aspects have a positive impact ultimately when we get towards the end of the day, because the body is experiencing more regulation as a result. So in terms of nourishing our sleep, the food we eat affects our sleep. It sets off a cascade. It can set off a negative cascade of reactions that lead to wellness and a sleep downward spiral. So digestion requires more energy than any other human function. And I suppose what we haven't really mentioned it, I haven't mentioned it really yet much, but I suppose when our body becomes overtired, or when our body becomes stressed or activated, cortisol goes into the system. Cortisol and adrenaline, that's that fight flight response. Cortisol and adrenaline can make it really hard to get to sleep because we're stimulated. Towards the end of the day, the body naturally shuts down cortisol production, which is a necessary state for relaxation and sleep induction. The timing of eating, what is eaten, and the combination of the foods have a significant impact. The process of digestion on its own interferes with sleep, and it contributes to discomfort on one part. But also, if the body is still processing and metabolizing food from a later dinner, the hunger inhibiting hormone that normally is shut down when we sleep can get delayed, but also reversed, which also then might lead to a cycle of snacking and overeating. So we'd also look at the types of food and how do they translate into the sleep world. So trans fats, they contain toxins that increase inflammation, that increases the stress hormone cortisol. So remember, there we go into the activation mode. High sugar foods increase glucose, insulin, and you guessed it, cortisol levels. I'm hoping that maybe this isn't relevant, but I'll mention it anyway. Alcohol makes us get drowsy. It decreases deep sleep, and of course that is a part of critical component for healing and recharging. Maybe more relevantly though, low fiber carbohydrates such as processed and snack foods and sugary drinks. When we have an absence of fiber, the sugar is absorbed quickly. It leads to spikes in blood sugar levels, insulin, and cortisol. So of course, now if we're looking at that as a picture, it would maybe help us to make different decisions around what we're eating and we're drinking and when. So in terms of meals, big meals, your main meal, we generally like to have that done within 2 to 3 hours of bedtime so that the digestion system has done what it needs to do and we are more open to the rest and digest mode. That doesn't mean that we can't have something additional to eat, and I'll include that as we try and package this up together. But again, it's just to mention that the reason for that, and of course we're tying everything into regulation as best as possible. Now, you're not going to be able to do this on your own. This needs to be a collaboration, a co-creational effort between you and your young person. So I was going to give you some ideas about how do we help to bring them into this. And again, I would anticipate you will modify this into your own child's ability and capacity. And if they can, I think sometimes it's a really good idea to get them to begin to track their own sleep. But I will preface that by saying not to the point that would become obsessional. So it'd be important that it would be, we're getting involved and interested in how much sleep we're getting, and maybe they take ownership of that in a light and not too onerous way. I think it's important, firstly, that we reinforce the connection between sleep, resilience, cognition, skin health, athletic performance. And often I encourage parents to sort of assign a value to sleep that would resonate with your young person. So, for example, I had a young person that I was working with earlier this year, and he had a condition that meant he fell over a lot. And we sort of encouraged that if we were going to work on the sleep, it was possible that he wouldn't fall over as much. And it ended up being the case, but it was a good motivator. So you're looking to try and identify, is there something in your young person's life that would help them buy into sleep, and can we connect it for them? And I guess as we work with them, have to remember that they are becoming, autonomous, independent, freely expressing themselves individuals. And this is also part of, their becoming a teenager and moving on in their lives. So we want to give them the control and the connection associated with this. So again, we give them prompts and boundaries in equal measure. And I guess the difficult thing is trying to maybe create those boundaries around, screens and screen use. And I know it's really easy for me to sit here and say, look, we'll have no technologies in the bedroom. And I guess the things that are really difficult, you could maybe leave till later on, that you introduce smaller changes. But the ideal scenario is that we don't have screens in the bedroom. And one idea is that we create two things: a digital sunset and a charging station outside of the bedroom. But I also am very conscious that sometimes when we try to make changes like that, we start to affect the relationship. Everything turns into an argument. So again, when we begin to try and make changes, like not having phones beyond a certain time or gaming beyond a certain time, that maybe we replace that. And I'm going to introduce you to a 90-minute protocol in the evening time, where we focus on connection and family engagement in order to try to replace what needs to come out of the sleep profile. Gaming stimulates the waking part of the brain. It overactivates. Exposure to, bright light overactivates the system. And you can hear this evening, we're trying to create the downshift. So that's why we would ideally begin to take the screens and the technology and that gaming aspect out as much as we possibly can. But like that, it's possible that we just have to make slow decisions and make changes in that collaborative way. I guess a few other things is that we're going to focus on our repair and our flexibility with our children. And also, I'm very aware that there is a lot of pressures: social pressure, homework load, extracurricular activities. And again, sometimes we have to decide. So again, I probably would try and recommend that we don't have more than 2 really heavy days, so that the other days are maybe a little bit lighter. But ultimately, that is something that you would decide as a little family unit. From the time we get home from school, I would probably begin to look at afternoon and evening rituals. so that when we get home from school, we really look for that decompression time after school. And then I would try and get the homework load completed early in the evening time. Again, you'll be met with resistance and challenge. But of course, what we keep doing is trying to create difference. And I think the connection, and I know I'm probably going to overuse the word tonight, but we're really trying to connect and engage and at the same time gather them into us so that they begin to be willing and active participants in the changes that we might make. I am going to recommend the regular evening meal for lots of reasons, the digestive reason notwithstanding, but again, because it's an opportunity to connect and chat and to have that time together. And of course, I'll also include a nervous system regulation activity, walk after dinner, a dance in the kitchen, breath work. And then you can have your screen time. Then you can have your gaming time if it's applicable. But what I would also then do is create space for the last 90 minutes before bedtime. And this is a time where we try to land the plane so that it's better if we perhaps come out of our bedrooms at this stage and we have some time in the shared spaces in our house, if that's doable, the kitchen, the living room, and to come out of the bedroom and kind of create a distinction between our wake and alert and maybe homework and, you know, what we do in the bedroom, laying in the bed, scrolling on phones and creating that separateness. And then we would introduce, I guess, what I think of as being a slow sequence to the bedroom, so that you are downstairs or in your living space. And in this time, we're really not looking for major inputs. We're not looking to learn new stuff, practice your words or whatever it is that they're working on at this moment in time. It would be more creative, some journaling, some coloring, some art, maybe watch a TV show, not on a laptop, ideally just on the TV. Could do a board game or a card game, provided that's not going to overactivate too many people. I know it always activates me when I don't win at Monopoly. But again, you're just trying to think around some things that might be helpful. I'd practice that in dim lighting. We are looking to support the melatonin production that happens. And what we know with this particular population is that it is possible that the melatonin is expressed differently or it is suppressed anyway. So what we're trying to do here is control our controllables. Dim lighting promotes the production of the sleep hormone melatonin. And of course, then we might move the last 20 minutes off or 30 minutes, have your snack, have your bath or your shower, then go to the bedroom, into our PJs, maybe read a book on a beanbag, listen to music, do some gentle stretching, do some of your regulatory activities, your breath work, have a chat, lights out, and then sleep time. Now we're going to talk about what happens when the lights go out in a minute, but I'm just kind of trying to lead you to this smaller place or this place where the rhythmicity and the flow is ideally being generated. Now I've obviously mentioned melatonin, and I know a lot of you had questions around melatonin and sleep. And of course, it is often typical that your children will be on melatonin. Firstly, it must only be used under the medical supervision, which I know that you will already know. And it is known to improve sleep onset and in some instances, duration. Sometimes it works and sometimes it doesn't work. And sometimes it works and then it stops working. It is best taken 1 to 2 hours before bedtime to be effective. And a lot of young adults that I see are taking it about 30 minutes before they want to go to sleep, whereas it seems that 1 to 2 hours before bedtime is more effective. And obviously it's going to be counterproductive if screens, lighting, activities suppress the delay of the melatonin production anyway. And of course, we also see that sometimes that the melatonin can create, grogginess, migraines, dizziness. So there are contraindications as well. So on that, I'll also just cover some natural sleep solutions that you could think about integrating. You're not going to do everything all in one go. You're going to take what feels doable, manageable, and appropriate, and maybe take one lever here, 1 to 2 small changes every week. And if the bedtime is really late, maybe that's the last thing you worry about, if that makes any sense to you, because that can always be brought forward earlier and earlier. And I'll show you what I mean by that when I do a case study with you in a moment. So in terms of natural solutions, aromatherapy, essential oils, lavender, chamomile, vetiver, you could also have them in herbal teas as we try and replace the caffeine. And of course, you don't need me to tell you that the caffeine is in those energy drinks as well as in tea and coffee and chocolate. So again, the caffeine itself has a big shelf life. It takes ages, 6 to 8 hours for it to be cleaned from the brain. So of course, it's best avoided if possible. And of course, when we avoid, we always replace. Or if we take away, we try and replace. And then we'd also look at like sleep promoting foods alongside the nutrition timing. So if you're going to have a snack before bedtime, and again, you know, some of you will be having extracurricular activities, which means that everything gets pushed out. So rather than having the heavy meal later in the day, you might better have having, you know, a healthy snack before the activity and then maybe a healthier snack after the activity, so that we're still full, but we're not having the heavy meal. Some foods to consider integrating. And of course, again, I'm acknowledging that you'll have limitations in some instances, but bananas, whole wheat, kiwis, turkey seeds, some nuts, pistachios, almonds, dairy, they all contain various forms of the tryptophan, which is the precursor to serotonin, which is the precursor to melatonin. And just going back for a moment on the gut health, 90% of serotonin is produced in the gut. Serotonin is the precursor to melatonin, the sleep hormone. So that is just another standout stat to really help us think about the diet and our nourishing aspects. And then, of course, we've talked about morning light, movement, the stress outlets, getting sunlight, managing activities, and finding those stress relief practices. And then, of course, we can look at the environment, dark, sleep-friendly environment, cool, comfortable, dark, without distraction. But also, I think it needs to be mentioned that ideally the bedroom and this, when it comes to sleep time, that we try to create a separation, that the bedroom and the bed is reserved for sleep only, and that we try to create that distinction. Now, obviously, before the talk tonight, we asked for questions and we got a lot of different questions. So I'm going to cover some and try and pull together what we have been talking about so far this evening. So this little person is 11. He wakes up tired all day. He's tired in school. His teacher comments on it. He's too tired for homework. He's too tired for activities. But of course, you know the story. He gets a big burst of energy thereafter. He's got a morning coffee habit. He skips breakfast. He's got a little bit of a restricted diet, and he refuses some foods as well. He never goes to bed early. He stays up and he has difficulty falling asleep. And of course, he's in a chronic fatigue cycle, which is impacting his learning and his functioning and of course his mood. So I guess, how would I approach this? So firstly, I would only make 1 to 2 collaborative changes every week. And I would rely heavily on warm, responsive, co-creational parent direction. At 11, I'd probably still put a lot of emphasis on the parent driving the changes here. As your child gets that little bit older, starts to become a little bit more self-directed, but of course, always with your support. And again, you're trying to motivate your person to have some ownership and to establish some input. Immediately, we can start with those small changes, the regular wake time, the morning light. We could introduce the protein. He'll eat eggs, so we could have a protein-rich breakfast. And again, it's not about saying, look, don't drink coffee. But again, it would be worth considering it or making an informed choice about it. And if we take away, we always replace. And then I would be introducing those nervous system regulatory tools and stress releases, but throughout the day. And then in the evening time, we want the nervous system to shift from activation mode from evening onwards. So introducing your evening meal, your regulatory activities, your 90 minutes before bedtime. I think at this age, I'd still have that jointly performed to establish then a lights out scenario. And I would probably encourage parental presence to help him stay in the bed and and start to go to sleep. And then I would obviously reconsider the evening meal timings. I'd adjust bedtime. I would do the reverse engineering on the bedtime. But if it's the thing that you establish that they only go asleep by 1 a.m., for example, often that's a good place to start. So if we already know 1 o'clock is the time they will actually get to sleep, sometimes it's worth doing the backward math that way and doing your 90-minute protocol an hour and a half before that, so that you introduce the practices and the procedures at the time they're already going to sleep by, and then slowly dialing it back to until you get to maybe a more appropriate time that reflects them getting closer to what their sleep need might actually be. And I hope that is making a little bit of sense in how I've described it. Another little question that came in. So the rule in the house was no phones or tech upstairs. They have one child who's late night reading, and that seems to be fine. He's not able to wind down, but he doesn't seem to be the problem as such. The problem at the moment was a restless preteen who was up and down the stairs, worse than he ever was when he was in a toddler bed, which I thought was a very good description. So I suppose we'll take this into, being a nervous system and attachment seeking pattern, and it's influenced by all of the things we've talked about this evening. So I suppose the one change that I'd probably look at here is a larger parental involvement before the lights out with this last 90-minute protocol. And once the lights go out, I'd actually probably stay with him and use parental presence as an attachment bridge to begin to help him create the downshift, and then allow the relaxing state and the sleep production to begin with greater ease. So another little question that came in was about a 16-year-old who goes to bed very late. He's going to sleep around 2 or 3 a.m. He's not tired, he plays guitar, he watches TV, he's exhausted, he's hard to wake. He's not into activity like sports. What's happening in the house is that the phone is away by 11, the TV remote is hidden, he's on certain medications, which is fair enough. And the parents ask, what other tactics can we look at? And I suppose I would think here that what we're looking at is a sort of like a fight freeze nervous system patterning, and he's exhausted and he's resistant to change, and he's going to be difficult to gather in. So I suppose the small adjustments with a gradual buy-in from him. Like we're talking about the nervous system tonight, I want you to think of language as a nervous system regulatory tool as well, and how we are communicating. As a co-creational mentor, I always talk about I messaging. So we're talking from the I, not the you. So you did this, you did that, or it's more like I feel, I need, how would it be? And I think that with our young people as well, maybe engaging in what is known as, motivational interviewing and parts integration, where we have open communication, empathy, and we're opening things up and asking them, what is it that you like about being up at night? What would it be like if we changed something? How would it be if we considered, doing things differently, and somehow trying to develop that communication style between you as your young person begins to make those informed choices. I would have thought in this instance, parents are taking away the phone, but it's probably too late the time we're taking it away at 11 o'clock. It's possible that we're in that high activation mode. And unfortunately, we do need to get to a point where we do lights out. If we're watching TV and if we're playing music on the guitar, that's not going to happen. So again, we need that slow boat with the 90-minute protocol, even if it's at the later time to begin with, and then bring it forward and forward as more time goes by. Obviously, what we are looking for, I've mentioned the word a couple of times, we gather him to us. In terms of your own child's attachment style, when we want to communicate with them, we need to be able to gather them to us. We need them to start to be listening with us. And I suppose that often means that when we begin to speak, we have the eye contact, and you gather them with your tone, your language use, and then we start to help them make decisions about what it might be to do things differently and how that might look. I'd obviously integrate the nervous system regulation tools, but with this young person, we need to include fun and humor so that we can really help him begin to want to make the changes as well. If the late sleep phase was to persist, then a strategy known as chronotherapy, it does need to be with medical supervision, though, is another option where the bedtime is late, but it gets moved later and later, and it almost is a full circle of the clock. But that absolutely needs to be done with medical supervision and support. Another question that came in was about, for a teacher working in a school, wanted to understand how can they support their neurodivergent teens in their classroom. And I thought about this, and I suppose that these are the things that I came up with. I think that if you are in any position to start the day outside with activities and fresh air, I would absolutely endorse that. I would also encourage the schools to be flexible with start times as we begin to work and improve sleep. We won't all be able to get our children up at 6 or 7 o'clock in the morning if they're only going to bed at 2 and 3. And sometimes just as we work on improving things, flexibility would be very welcome. If we can't be outside, let's be close to windows where there's daylight. Let's allow in the day for the stress releases every 1.5 hours. Let's allow for naps and quiet time before 2:30 p.m. And that's another point, that if we have someone who is needing to sleep it off, but we want to put the regular wake time in play, we can allow for a nap. We have a perfect nap opportunity between 1 and 2:30 p.m. We try not to sleep later than 2:30 p.m. and we don't do a nap at all if it really affects bedtime as well. But sometimes that's another way to make up our sleep. And what I also thought might be helpful is to structure the main learning earlier in the day rather later in the day, and also to maybe consider the homework load, which is another stress factor and keeps our children from beginning to be able to wind down because of all of the pressures that they are confronted by. So with the approach I'm delivering with you tonight, it's a nervous system regulation and sleep root cause approach. And it's trying to shift the focus from trying to induce sleep to actually supporting regulation and on focusing on uncovering and addressing the root cause. So before we're trying to induce sleep, now what we're trying to do is support the nervous system and the root causes that might be stimulating the problems that we're experiencing. So what that's doing then is it's acknowledging that sleep's a biological signal of safety. And what we're trying to do is create safety emotionally, physically, practically, spiritually. And then when the sleep emerges, when the brain perceives that there is safety and that the sleep is a biological process, it's not something that can be forced. And of course, when it doesn't happen, it's not a failure. We just need to keep exploring what's activating the system physiologically, emotionally, cognitively, and environmentally. So what do we do when we do lights out and our children can't sleep? What do we do when the lights go out and we can't sleep? So firstly, let's remove the performance pressure around sleep. Let's reduce the anticipatory anxiety by understanding that the rest is firstly beneficial and that sleep will emerge naturally when the body is ready and not forced. But I do think that we need to have a lights out. One of the questions that I read over was that one of the young people was reading, just reading. I read to go to sleep, but I read for a couple of minutes and then I go to sleep. If the reading is just for reading, we're never going to get to sleep, if that makes any sense to you. So we might need to benchmark activities. So when the lights go out, we get into bed and then we begin to try to go to sleep. So again, we might integrate some gentle sensory and nervous system regulation tools in the bed. We practice the breathing, progressive muscle exercise, that's that body scan, your awareness to your muscles, bringing awareness to the sensory experience, what the mattress feels like a mindfulness strategy. And we're helping to try and shift the parasympathetic dominance. Okay. Now, if we can't sleep after 20 minutes or so, there are different schools of thoughts around this. My own has always been just keep trying, resting body is better than anything else. But sometimes that can be really stressful. So again, we might look at journaling or something creative for externalizing what the mind is keeping too active, so that you can externalize your thoughts, emotions, the concerns, to release the cognitive vigilance and to not analyze or problem solve. Now, I would definitely integrate journaling as part of that 90-minute protocol, but I certainly would maybe think of it as being a little pillar of support when the lights go out and we've been trying and we're not getting there. And of course, what we're then going to do is trying to always address the underlying emotional processes, the academic pressure, the identity development, to just really reinforce the emotional safety, to allow the brain to disengage from this sort of protective alertness. So I think I'll open the floor to questions. I'm just looking at the time there. And if there's anything that I haven't covered for you well enough or clear enough, please just let me know.
Thanks for that, Lucy. You covered a hell of a lot of ground as far as I'm concerned. But Orla, you've been helping monitor what's coming in on the Q&A and the chat there. Is there anything that you feel we
Yeah,
Useful to
there's
keep
a good
going.
few questions in relation to melatonin, Lucy, and I know you've mentioned it. There is a bit of variety in the questions, I suppose. One asking what your thoughts on the use of it is, but also there's been a couple in relation to young people who are on melatonin and it's working either initially, but they're waking later in the night, or it worked when they started taking it initially and it doesn't seem to be working as
Yeah.
effectively now.
And I mentioned that, right? So I suppose melatonin is a hormone naturally produced in the body. Again, I mentioned that it's possible in the neurodivergent population that their expression of melatonin is different. And it does seem that in some ways the first line of defense is melatonin prescription. Okay, so it can be helpful, but its job is to promote sleep onset. It isn't to promote sleep duration. Does that make any sense to you? Now, there is a study, or there's a couple of studies that have been done, and again, in this particular cohort, we see a lot of studies done around the autism spectrum as opposed to any other neurodivergence. And there is a suggestion that some of the children that were on it, or the young people that were on it, they did improve their sleep latency, which is getting to sleep. And actually, it also improved their sleep duration by 30 minutes per night, which often feels like that's not a lot. But if we extrapolate that over a week, it's 2.5 hours. If we extrapolate that over a month, so it is. But what we also hear is that it works initially, or it doesn't work at all. Or it works, it stops working, and then it has some of those other contraindications that we mentioned. I'm always an advocate of us getting supports that work. Does that make any sense? So if it's available to us, but again, if I'm hoping that you might be hearing that what we are always looking for from a sleep and an integrative, holistic sleep perspective is we're looking for the root cause. For all intents and purposes, the melatonin could be just considered a sticking plaster, if that makes any sense to you. And what we try and do is look backwards at all the other things to see are there gaps that we could fill a little bit more, and maybe the melatonin would work more effectively. But like I have a young person that I'm working with at the moment who is on a melatonin supplement, but he doesn't have any sort of bedtime ritual. He is exposed to bright light very close to sleep time, or he's gaming, or he's doing something. So there's no point in giving him melatonin, if that makes any sense to you, because we're not honoring what we need to do for sleep with or without it. Does that make any sense to you?
Mm. Yeah, absolutely. And I suppose there's been quite a few comments in relation to the melatonin, and one that's come in since you started responding is in relation to is there any long-term effects? And secondly, a parent whose child has been on melatonin, it stopped working, and then they were on clonidine. I'm not sure if I'm producing
Yeah,
it right, and that hasn't been effective, but the parent is afraid to stop
I
in case the
know.
situation gets worse without
Yeah.
anything else or
Yes,
another
exactly.
plan.
So
So that
firstly, the research around melatonin it's very new. I think there's only about 4 or 5 years of it. Does that make any sense to you? So we don't know about the long-term effects of it, but it is a naturally produced hormone. All the indicators at the moment are that it isn't harm or long-term effects. So I would be not unnecessarily worrying, okay? And I think we've enough to be worrying about. Similarly, with the parent who's on another medication, it's worth maybe staying on what you've been prescribed, but maybe there's stuff tonight that would begin to make more sense. Like even myself, as I was studying and researching to present to you guys this evening, I thought about things that I'm not doing that I need to do with my own children that could make a difference, you know? And I suppose yesterday evening, I met one of my children drinking Fanta at about 9 p.m. And I suppose just keeping it real that there are things that we can change. There are things that we can look at that we don't need to pull the rug completely. So I suppose maybe go back to the initial parts of the levers that we talked about and see did they begin to make any difference. And my hope would be that you'll start to make some progress, and then you can have a decision about what you come on or go off.
okay. Thanks, Lucy. We've another comment and question here. A parent whose son uses ASMR to sleep, so no phone in the room, but sometimes uses a fan, and wondering is this okay? He's always needed some kind of white noise to sleep since he was a baby. Now
Yeah.
16 and neurodivergent.
Yeah, like I mean, again, the white noise use. the evidence, the research is relatively new and again inconclusive. So we don't really know. I see it a lot with young children, parents that I work with, that they just seem to be using white noise like an epidemic almost, right? And we don't know what the long-term effects are on speech development, brain development. However, what we do know about it as well is it can help children go to sleep with greater ease. It can keep them in a deeper sleep and also can buffer out external noises. I guess I'm an advocate of something that works. So let's say that feels like it's working for that young person. And I would say we go with what works. There was another question earlier in the week, Orla, that I recall that was about somebody listening to music to get to sleep. Now, do we want that really? No, from a normal sleep hygiene perspective, we would say, oh, everything needs to go off. But realistically, if that young person is listening to something, ideally not on a phone, but if they're listening to something, they get to sleep and they're sleeping, I would take that as a win, realistically.
Okay. And that kind of fits in. We have another parent here who's saying their 18-year-old daughter has difficulty sleeping and is recently diagnosed with autism, but she needs her mum to rub her back most nights to help her to go off to sleep. So the concern is about moving on in her own life and what will become that support.
You'll be fine. Like genuinely, like that goes right back to the co-regulation, doesn't it? And we've talked about a hand and a parent and parental presence. Like, of course, at 18, would we want them not to need a hand on us, but also that she's willing to have the hand on her? I would take that as a win too, if that makes any sense to you. And I think that we are very creative as people and we find our way. I would think of what mum is doing at the moment as what I call an attachment bridge strategy. So attachment, nervous system regulation, you are helping her feel safe. And you'll find your way. When I work with young children, I always have a hand on them. And I suppose over time, I start to pat the mattress more than I pat them. And over time, I start to scale it back. At some point, maybe you'll think about doing that. But for now, if that's what helps to soothe her, I would absolutely endorse it. And actually, I encourage that. Like, you know, the guy who's up and down the stairs, I would encourage the parent to sit beside him and put their hand on him because it would keep him in the bed. And then those things can be modified as more time goes by.
Okay, thank you. A couple of comments and questions again in relation to phones in the bedroom.
I didn't really want to talk about it tonight, but go on.
Yes, and you know the I suppose the aggravation and the aggression that can sometimes escalate around trying to manage that when a parent tries to intervene and seeing the natural consequence then of the impact in the morning. So there's been a few comments in relation to the difficulties of managing the phone. And
I mean, I've experienced my own difficulties. I've got 4 children. My oldest is 23. And let's say when he was 15, we were trying to take the phones and shut down the Wi-Fi, and it used to cause so much drama. In the end, we just had to trust him. And I suppose we had to try and put flight mode on and different things like that. And, you know, trust him in one part and maybe let the screen be the concession, but we'd try and change all the other things. Does that make any sense to you? Like, there is a saying I kind of work by, which is I try and never let the task be more important than the relationship. Now, ultimately, do we want screens as part of sleep? No, we don't. Do they affect sleep hugely? Yes, they do. We talked tonight about activation, cortisol secretion, and blocking. And unfortunately, the screen use does all of that. But if we worked around it, does that make any sense? If we said, okay, the phone's a concession. One thing my daughters suggested to me the other day, if they wanted someone to not use the phone, they said, well, if you put the passcode, if you put the passcode on it, you can't get into the phone. If you've set the passcode and I give you the phone, Orla, you won't be able to get into my phone because of the passcode. Now, you could start looking at things like that, but I actually think it's more about collaboration. I think it's about, let's have a boundary then. Okay, it can be in the bedroom, but it has to go into flight mode at X. Okay, and I suppose, what do we replace that with? And then I suppose maybe in time it could be charged downstairs, but maybe we could leave them and trust them and see, you know, can we put a boundary in place in other ways? It's not easy. It's at the coal face. And I definitely think sometimes we just need to pick our battles. And I think there are easy things that we can do, easy-ish, okay? And then there are really hard things. And sometimes you've got to think, okay, where are we really at in this and what's important? Of course, we want them to sleep better. We want them to get enough sleep and all of that. But maybe we take a slow boat there.
Exactly. And maybe if it's early days with the phone, it's easier to put those management pieces in place than a child who's had a phone
100%. Like if it's early days, guys, sunset boundary, digital boundary, charging station outside of the bedroom so that it's never even a thing. But then also, like I mentioned a couple of times tonight about the modeling, and I'm conscious of this as well and don't always follow my own guidelines. And when I don't, my own sleep is wrecked. Is that we need to put our own phones away. We need to replace the screen with green for all intents and purposes. We need to have our own expressive creative outlets. And I think by showing that, we also help our kids begin to understand the benefits. One of my kids is 21 and she said, like, she loves sleep, and look, she's grown up here, right? So thank goodness. But she said her friends of 21, only now they're buying into sleep because they really feel the effects of not sleeping. So it comes anyway. Okay, I know that it's hard to get to this point in time, but I just would just say to you that it is really hard and it's really difficult to try and manage everything else, because it isn't just sleep. It's about eating, it's about going to everything, it's about getting them out the door to school, doing whatever homework or study, and sometimes it's going to be about trying to get them to wipe their own bottoms. So it is, it's on a big spectrum here. So be very mindful of that, and I would slowly go through things for you so that you're not overwhelming any more than you are.
Thanks. I might just one more. There's been a lot of comments in relation to the melatonin and the phone and kind of similar type questions that you have addressed. Somebody's asking for your thoughts about emotional offloading pre-sleep. A 13-year-old autistic son has a tendency to fixate on all the negative things of the day.
Yeah. And I suppose, look, again, it's the perfect time to do it. It would seem that's what the brain wants to do. It's trying to maybe create purging opportunities maybe earlier in the day, and then also about our language use, so that it's all the negative things and of those negative things that they worries. But if it's about tomorrow, look, we worry about that tomorrow. We park things. We create a worry park. We create we create different strategies to potentially help that offload. I'd be encouraging offload earlier if possible, but then also creating lots of little opportunities, because even in that last 90-minute protocol, normally don't want big cognitive inputs, but even as I said that out loud, I also say let's play a board game, and there's going to be cognitive input there. I guess what I really mean is I don't want to be starting to learn to do something brand new, but there's definitely opportunities. But maybe that's a perfect opportunity. Let's write it all down, let's draw it all out, let's dance it out, so that we're really trying to not change the person, but also support the person in how they're experiencing it. So it doesn't feel like he can't do that or he's not allowed to do that. Let's create space for him to do it. But I'd create opportunities earlier in the evening time as well, if I can. And then if not, the 90 minutes beforehand, or the hour really, because the last kind of 20, 30 minutes, I generally think is by the time we've gone upstairs and maybe they're getting themselves ready and doing a few things in their own way before we come back into the mix. And hopefully that is helpful in some way.
Okay. There are a few more questions. I'm conscious of the time. Will I pose one more, or will
I'm okay, Emma. You said 8:30, 8:15, we're out of here, but I'm happy to answer whatever. I did tell you I wasn't too sure how long it was going to take.
Okay, one short one, a query around weighted blankets.
Oh yes, and I'm so sorry. I obviously did mean to talk about sensory inputs. So again, the weighted blanket can be a really helpful sensory tool. And of course, I'll always integrate into the bedroom emotional attachment items, whether that is a plushie, a security blanket, a nightlight, a weighted blanket. The weighted blanket is meant to be used with professional supervision so that it gets made, the weight is right for the child's body. So that's just something that I would mention. But again, this is us trying to dial into the sensory safety and profile of your young person, and that you keep modifying some of what you've heard about this evening to match their sensory profile. And a weighted blanket, the nightlight, the secure, they're all part of that. So too would be, if your child, we need the good activity, the jumping, the bouncing, your sensory play, or might need some brushing, different aspects that help the nervous system come into that downshift that we're trying to create.
Okay. Thank you, Lucy. We've gotten through the majority of them. There are a few, but some of them are quite similar to responses you've given or information you've given through the night. So thank you for that, and I hope for the thanks to the participants who've asked the questions, and hopefully most of you have got all, answers to the specific ones. So thank you, everyone. I'll hand you back to Emmett.
Yeah, thanks for that. Thank you so much, Lucy. Thanks for coming to do this. I just want to show you this very quickly, right? Because we had a lot of queries that come in about is this recorded? Is this recorded? Because people that couldn't make it. And this is something I wanted to show you. This so we do record these. We'll put up this in the coming days. You can see this is the west.planetyouth.ie website. I don't know if you can see that, west.planetyouth.ie. And here under resources, you'll see various things related to the parent information, parent booklets. But there's a section here called videos, right? And that would have, this is where you'll find the recording of this webinar in the coming days. So hopefully we'll have it up for you over the weekend or maybe on Monday, something like that. There's one here now, just for example, you might find this of interest. So if you click in here, you see it's called Supporting Neurodivergent Teens Experiencing Social Exclusion. And this is kind of something that we put on back in January. Again, it was something we felt that it needed a bit of looking at. And similar to this, we put this webinar up in the same space. And you'll find that, there's copies of the presentation that I gave. We'll get, maybe not all, but some of your slides, Lucy, we'll pop them up as well. And we'll put up a kind of few bits around what supports there are available. And just on that, just want to show you this quickly, just a couple of quick slides, which are these are sports, some of national, a good chunk of them will be here in the west of Ireland. These slides will go up as well, so don't worry, you don't have to scribble all this down, but there's various different bits and pieces out there. Some of the stuff that the task force provide around parenting support and underage substance use counselling and things like that. There will be kind of a link between neurodivergence and concerns around substance use issues as well. So it might be something hopefully not, you won't have to worry about or avail of, but I'm just saying that the services, some of them are out there and they'll be available to you. Youth Work Ireland Galway, you see mentioned there's a fabulous youth counselling service. We have Jigsaw, we have Mindspace up in Mayo, great service at number 4 here in town. And so lots of different things you can avail of there. I won't dwell on it, but these kind of links and supports will be available on the recording. And you should get a bit of a follow-up information about how to access that. But it's west.planetyouth.ie. As you can see, there's a few more support services there. And just finally to touch on this is a nice little booklet that's been developed by one of the local support groups here. This is the Autism Neuro-diversity, Oranmore, Athenry, and they put together a fabulous little information booklet for parents about some of the stuff that's out there for the more neurodiverse kids amongst us and parents. So again, I'll put that up with the slides as well. And that's it really. I just wanted to show you those few bits and pieces. That's it. Any final thoughts before we hit the hang up?
No, I'm relieved.
I bet you are too. And listen, I want to say a big thanks to you, Lucy, for coming and doing this. I know it's a little bit outside your comfort zone, but it's much appreciated because there isn't a lot of resources in this space, and it's fabulous to be able to put it up and save it and have it as a recording for people in time to come as well. So
Yeah.
much appreciated. Orla, any thoughts?
No, just to thank everyone and thank all those who did send in the questions and help us, form it, and hope that they got a lot of information from the evening. And thank you both.
Okay. Seeing as you're our chief or plate spinner there, Orla, you can just hang up and we'll leave it at that. So thanks
Have a
everybody.
good evening, everyone. Thank you.
Thank you.